Hello everyone, my name is Zio, and before we jump into the build that I'm suggesting, I will add a small note that will also be true for other builds that I'll be designing for the accessibility challenge. I am looking for mostly builds that not only are accessible to players that have any sort of impediment that prevents them from playing high APM classes and rotations, but also for new players as a way to bridge the gap that we have between endgame PvE and the rest of Guild Wars 2. They are not open world builds, although they can be adapted to some extent. I wanted them not only to be simple due to the amount of actions that you need to do, but also due to the type of actions you do and the reasons you are doing them. This leads us to the first one, Power DPS Vindicator. This build is pretty hard and interesting to master, but insanely rewarding and simple to pick up. I benchmarked for around 1 hour after building this pack from scratch and reading their skills and traits, and pretty much while learning what these skills do, how they line up, which are worth pressing and which aren't, and so on. So mostly experimenting with the class. I managed to get around 93% of the actual Snow Crow's benchmark for the class, all the while pressing 4 to 5 buttons and auto-attacking. That's it. The build is intended to teach players some principles in rotations, such as completing their auto-attack chains, including which actions interrupt and which do not interrupt the chains, how to position yourself during encounters, since you are full melee, how to avoid damage without the need of dodges, bursting and sustaining your DPS, where your damage is coming from and how to build a rotation, managing energy and cooldowns as a Revenant at a very basic level, how to adapt to the encounter with weapon swaps, which may lead to more actions per minute, and lastly but not least, how to analyze your own performance and improve based on trait buffs and skill cooldowns. The build revolves around auto-attacking all the time, using dodges as soon as your endurance bar is filled because you get a plus 25% damage modifier after you dodge, while also doing damage if you hit your enemy, spamming Greatsword 5 for big damage and legend swapping between Shiro and Jalas while activating their respective upkeep skills. That is it. Pretty much the entire rotation in a single paragraph. It has 15 APM Golem benchmark, which could be filtered around to be a bit lower or higher depending on each player's wants and needs. I personally decided to go for a slightly lower than 20 APM benchmark because in an actual fight you might have to do more actions, such as using your heals, blocks, CC, maybe special action keys, and even weapon swapping, right? So it leaves space for the player to play around a bit without feeling like they are pushing themselves if they do not want to. A lot of encounters also have forced downtimes, which end up lowering your actions per minute. But even then, I opted to keep the APM low, so it's simpler for players to pick up on the rotation and make it second nature, so they can pay more attention to the encounters and optimizations they can make. The burst part of the rotation is essentially lining up Death Drop, which is the name of your dodge skill, with Greatsword 5, while either Impossible Odds or Vengeful Hammers is active, which are the names of the upkeep skills from Shiro and Jalas respectively. Very simple. Your sustained rotation is essentially just auto-attacking with either upkeep skill active. You have access to crowd control from Forced Engagement and Jade Winds, with some passive, soft CC also coming from chills when you auto-attack. You have decent cleave damage, Vengeful Hammers offering more than Impossible Odds. You have access to stability with Inspiring Reinforcement. You have access to Condition Cleanse with Soothing Stone and Riposting Shadows. You have a lot of mobility through Phantom's Onslaught, Riposting Shadows, and Phase Traversal. And also lots of damage avoidance from dodges, riposting shadows, Imperial Guard, and skills from your secondary weapon. You, however, have no access to ranged attacks, and your CC is pretty limited by your energy and legend swap cooldown. I recommend taking a secondary weapon to help you cover those weaknesses. Having a hammer offers more CC, access to ranged attacks, and damage avoidance. Having a staff offers much better CC, even more than a hammer, healing, and damage avoidance, but you will still lack ranged attacks. The benchmark for this class is really high for how simple it is to play, but it struggles a bit in open world and certain instanced encounters due to low cleave damage and CC, as well as the reliance on your greatsword skills and dodging for damage. I think this is a great build for people who want to get into instance content such as raids, fractals, and strikes, but are afraid the damage they will bring will be far too low due to action per minute restrictions. This build perfectly works around that, while also leaving plenty of space for player growth by pushing it past the 15 APM that I'm suggesting and integrating other skills or playing around some trade and stat choices to increase survivability or utility should it be needed. And that's without mentioning the dopamine hit you get when you crit on your death drops. The damage is truly insane. The DPS it brings is extremely competitive, surpassing various other classes' current benchmarkings on Snowcrows, while only pressing 4 to 5 buttons. I really recommend trying it out and slowly working towards a 34 to 35k benchmark for this build. If you want to push the APM all the way to 20 on the Golem, I'm certain you can bench closer to 35.5 or even 36k. The current Snowcrows benchmark does almost 60 actions per minute. This one does 15. As closing notes, a few things to keep in mind during encounters while playing this class. First, Greatsword 5 damage scales with hitbox size, so the bigger the hitbox, the higher the damage of the skill. Greatsword 4 is a block that increases its chain attack damage the more hit it blocks. Using Greatsword 5 with quickness does not reset your auto attack chain. Legend swapping doesn't cancel your current action, be it auto attacks, Greatsword 5, or dodge. Vengeful hammers heal you and reduce the damage you take. Because of that, Jalas is a more defense-oriented legend than Shiro, which is more offensive-oriented in their skills. Have positive mental attitude and give stability to people as well as help CC where needed. Your class is very selfish, but you do have options to help your team as well.